Alright, so I won't be dwelling too much into the introduction here. You guys have already read the title here. This right here is the OnePlus 9RT, and this is the all new Xiaomi 11T Pro. Now, they're both one of the most competing devices, and this is a comparison that almost everyone has been asking about. I mean, most YouTubers have done it, but we have gone a little bit too much in depth with this. So bear in mind, this is going to be a slightly longer video, but this is probably the most in-depth comparison that you'll see of these two phones. So without wasting any time, this is Varun from GTR, and like I said, you're watching my in-depth comparison of the 11T Pro with the 9RT. Let's get started. Alright, so first things first, let's start by talking about the design here. And technically speaking, there's nothing new here. The 9RT is similar to the 9 and 9 Pro, basically its predecessors, while the 11T Pro is similar to pretty much every other Xiaomi device that they've launched. And the only difference is in terms of the finishes. OnePlus has a matte style black finish that looks quite elegant, while our unit of the 11T Pro has a glossy finish that's quite flauntable. Now, unlike what the photos and videos might make you think, it's actually the 9RT that's more slippery in comparison to the 11T Pro. This hacker black finish is genuinely slippery and shimmery, while the 11T Pro has a much better grip. The trade-off to that is that the 11T Pro tracks a lot of fingerprints, while there are practically zero fingerprints or smudges on the OnePlus 9RT. Now both the devices are a bit top heavy, but while holding, the 11T Pro feels a slight bit heavier. Now on paper the difference isn't much, but the in-hand use of the 9RT is much better and more ergonomic as opposed to the 11T Pro. This is also due to the fact that the 11T Pro is quite thick in comparison to the 9RT. Now speaking about additional features, the 9RT has this alert slider here, which is my favorite feature here. I genuinely wish more Android makers adopted this. It's a genuine lifesaver, so yeah, kudos to OnePlus for keeping that feature. On the other hand, the 11T Pro does have the IR blaster at the top. Again, another feature that just Xiaomi does, and I wish more Android smartphones had this feature. So yeah, each phone has one unique tool. Now in terms of the build quality, the 9RT has an aluminum frame here, while the 11T Pro has a plastic frame. On the other hand, the 11T Pro has Gorilla Glass Victus up front, which is far superior in comparison to the Gorilla Glass 5 on the 9RT. Now they both have a glass back, but there's no rating mentioned. Also, speaking of ratings, the 11T Pro has IP53 rating, while OnePlus has no such rating. Now, if I had to summarize things into a nutshell, I would say that the 9RT feels a bit more ergonomic in hand. The weight distribution is better, but I just don't like this slippery finish. In comparison, the 11T Pro feels a bit more grippier, but then again is a tad bit heavier as well. So yeah, it's always going to be a give or take between these two devices. As a whole, I think I would slightly lean towards the 9RT here, but just very slightly. Now, in terms of connectivity, they're both dual SIM devices with no SD card support. Of course, they're both 5G devices as well, but the 9RT supports just 8 5G bands, while the 11T Pro takes it up a notch with 13 5G bands. Now, next up, let's spend some time talking about these flagship cameras here. I say flagship, but I don't really mean it, because, well, they're not entirely flagship. I'll tell you why. So specs wise, the 11T Pro has a 108 MP primary sensor that has been on pretty much all of their devices from budget to flagship, so no changes there. You also get an 8 MP ultra wide sensor and a 5 MP tele macro sensor. On the 9RT, you get a 50 MP primary sensor with OIS, a 16 MP ultra wide sensor, and a 2 MP macro sensor. Up front, they both have 16 MP shooters for selfies. So yeah, specs wise, they don't really sound as appealing to me as other flagship devices do, simply because we've seen a lot of mid-range devices and a lot of, flagship killers right now in the market that offer pretty much the same specs or sometimes even better. So yeah, I'm not really enticed by the specs. But obviously, when we talk about mobile photography, specs are just one thing. There's a lot of software processing that happens, and the Snapdragon 888 has a very good ISP. So let's see how the actual results perform. Now in daylight shots, OnePlus clicks more contrasty images. As such, the black levels here are more prominent on the 9RT as opposed to the 11T Pro. The HDR also works better on the 9RT. Now it's not by a massive margin, but it is definitely noticeable. Also, both the phones saturate the images quite a bit, Not a lot though, which basically makes the shot look appealing. It's a very controlled level of saturation and I personally do like it. Now in terms of details, the 11T Pro technically has double the megapixels, but in reality the details are the same on both the phones. So it's not like the Xiaomi device has an advantage here. Moving on to human shots, the 11T Pro seems to have an issue with handling the body tones with the HDR turned on. As such, the human shots are a bit darker. Now, the portrait mode is equally good on both with excellent edge detection. No complaints there, but once again, like I said, the HDR control on the 11T Pro definitely needs to be worked upon. Moving on to selfies, and OnePlus has a natural tone here, while Xiaomi does a lot of over sharpening. I mean, this is quite evident and you can clearly see it in the pictures here. The colors are also slightly better on the 9RT. As far as the edge detection goes, well, they're both decent enough, though I think once again the 9RT has a slight edge here. For videos,
Alright, so this is recording 4K 30fps footage from the 11T Pro, which is on my left, while the OnePlus 9RT, which is on my right side. And I think they're both doing a decent job here in terms of color reproduction. There is apparently some kind of frame skipping happening on the Xiaomi 11T Pro, which is kind of really bad. I don't think this thing will be apparent in the final video, but at least while recording, that is the kind of result that I'm getting on the viewfinder. So not a good recording experience, I would say. In terms of stabilization, this is the normal one, no stabilization mode turned on, so you can judge it for yourself. Here's the kind of stability you can expect on both the phones. The OnePlus 9RT is far better here in terms of the stability that's concerned. Xiaomi is obviously trying to do its best with EIS and a crop sensor, but clearly OnePlus is winning this point right here. Alright, so now recording 1080p 30fps selfie footage from both the phones. Xiaomi has the HDR option enabled, while the 9RT has no option for it, but otherwise, I mean, you can take a judgment of the HDR performance here. Interestingly, even though these are flagship devices, they don't let you record 4K selfie footage, which is a big bummer. I don't really fancy that. One thing that's quite apparent right now is you can see the shadow that's forming thanks to the specs that I'm wearing. Now, OnePlus is able to handle that and has an overall apparently better HDR performance here, while with the 11T Pro, there's kind of some kind of black levels highlighted here, so I'm not really a fan of it. And then again, the OnePlus makes my skin texture look a little bit unrealistic and a little too orangish. So, I mean, take your pick for that. In terms of stability, this is the kind of stability you can expect, and obviously you can see the mic quality here too.
one thing that's worth highlighting is that the 11T Pro does have support for 1080p 60fps selfie videos, but in that kind of scenario, the HDR has to be disabled. So I'm not really a fan of it, and more importantly, these are flagship, or like at least the brand calls them as flagship devices. So at least 4K selfie footage should have been an option here. Not really impressed by that. Moving on to low light shots, and overall Xiaomi here has better illumination here. Now, noise isn't there on either phones. Xiaomi definitely has a more brighter shot. That being said, the lack of OIS on the 11T Pro makes clicking night mode shots harder. As such, even slight shakes make the subjects blurry. On the other hand, the 9RT, thanks to OIS, makes it easier to click shots in the night mode. Now with the night mode on, the 9RT has more accurate colors. Apart from that, both the phones are equally good in terms of details. The HDR performance on the 9RT in the night mode is slightly on a cinematic tone, while the 11T Pro's HDR, well, doesn't work that well with the night mode turned on. So I would say it's a give or take in both the phones. On the whole, I think I would pick the 9RT here in terms of the camera performance. Not by a massive margin, but the OIS support on the primary sensor definitely aids it, especially for videography and for night mode photography, so that's good. In terms of colors, like I said, it has a more contrasty and a more cinematic look. So if you don't like that, then the 11T Pro is definitely a better option here. So yeah, once again, it's down to preferences. But personally, I think I would prefer a camera sensor with OIS as opposed to supposedly AIS, which Xiaomi claims to be able to match up with OIS performance, but clearly it does not. Next up, let's talk about the displays here. Now, based on the spec sheets, they are both pretty similar. But the 11T Pro basically has a far better display in terms of color reproduction here. It supports Dolby Vision and also has support for 1 billion colors. Now, OnePlus claims that it has support for P3 color gamut and of course the sRGB color profiles as well. But yeah, at the end of the day, the 11T Pro has a better panel for sure. Now, the good part here is that they're both wideband L1 certified and they both support HDR10 plus content on Netflix and YouTube. So that's good. But yeah, basically, they're both excellent panels. They're both flagship grade panels. But the 11T Pro definitely takes the display quality up a notch in comparison to the 9RT. Now, the display segment is obviously aided by the audio department and you get stereo speakers on both the phones. They both sound equally good, although Xiaomi has tuning done by Harman Kardon, but realistically speaking, both the devices are equally good. Moving on, let's talk about the performance now. They're both Snapdragon 888 devices with UFS 3.1 storage, although I would have expected 3.2 here, but both are the same level. In terms of overall performance, the 9RT is better, especially for sustained loads as well. Like for instance, you can see right now in a CPU throttling test, I ran tests at both the normal modes and then at the high performance mode in both the devices. 9RT easily wins here with less throttling and a better overall performance. For day-to-day usage, they're both equally good and they're both equally good for gaming as well. Now, obviously it's a Snapdragon 888 device or devices and both the phones heat up, so there's no winner here to be honest. But yeah, in terms of throttling and stuff like that, the 9RT has a better sustained performance. So I guess OnePlus has one more point here. Moving on, let's talk about the software here. It's the MIUI 12.5 against the OxygenOS 11.3 on this. They're both Android 11 based, which again is a bummer. If you're launching new devices, please ensure that they come with Android 12. It's a shame because you claim to offer 3 Android updates, but essentially one of them is just going to be Android 12. That's kind of like basically jumping around the laws and stuff like that. I don't really like it. These devices should have come with Android 12. Now moving on, about the software segment, I've been a OnePlus fanboy all my life, to be very honest. But to be very honest with you, I think I would pick MIUI 12.5 here. See, there are a couple of reasons for that. First, there are 0 ads now on the Xiaomi device. Obviously, there is a couple of bloat here. Everything is uninstallable. Same thing with OnePlus. I mean, the definition of bloat is basically stuff or apps that you don't want. Now, they might be useful to some folks. They might not be useful to some other folks. Regardless, both the devices have pre-installed apps that you can easily uninstall and no ads. So they're both at par at that. Now, the reason why I say that I prefer MIUI 12.5 here is because of the overall stability. This thing, like the 9RT is buggy AF. I kid you not, I have faced so many bugs in my usage of this phone that I was to the point I was about to slam this phone on my desk. There's just so random bugs, app crashes at random moments and gestures just failing to work. And it's just a very bad experience. Now, OnePlus has already received a lot of hate regarding the Android 12 update for their OnePlus 9 and 9 Pro devices. And I'm guessing that is one of the reasons why OnePlus did not ship Android 12 on the 9RT, because they realized it was just as buggy or probably even worse. Although I fail to imagine how could anything become even worse than this. But OnePlus, well, its software experience was one of the most stable ones out there. That is lacking from the 9RT. And that is a big bummer. Now, I've never been a fan of MIUI. I'll be honest, I've never really liked this skin. But this is far more usable and definitely has a lot of features as compared to what the supposedly OxygenOS thing has. Now, obviously with Android 12, probably you'll get more of ColorOS and stuff like that. That's a conversation that we'll leave for our long-term reviews. But for now, well, the 11T Pro definitely has a better software experience. Moving on, let's talk about the battery life. Now, the 11T Pro has a 5000 mAh battery with 120 watts of fast charging, while the 9RT has 4500 mAh of battery with 65 watts of charging. Now, in my testing of offline charging, in 15 minutes, the 9RT goes from 0 to 64%, while the 11T Pro goes from 0 to 78%. For a full charge, the 9RT takes 29 minutes, while the 11T Pro takes just 21 minutes. Now, overall, they're both excellent devices. 4500 mAh is slightly on the lower side when you're packing in a flagship processor like the Snapdragon 888, but even so, the phone does manage to last a full day of heavy usage. Obviously, at night you do need to charge this thing up, but I mean, with 65 watts of quick charging, it's not an issue at all. With 11T Pro, the device does last a little bit longer. Plus, I mean, we've seen this previously as well. MIUI is a definitely more optimized OS when you talk about the battery segment. So yeah, overall in the battery segment also, I think the 11T Pro easily wins this one. So the pricing. Now, the 9RT starts for rupees 43,000 for the 8 plus 128GB variant and then goes to 47,000 for the 12 plus 256GB variant. Now, in comparison, the 11T Pro starts at just 40,000 for the 8 plus 128GB variant and goes all the way up to 44,000 for the highest maxed out variant. So, which phone to pick? Honestly, I would say if the slight advantages in camera do not matter to you. I mean, there's no denying the fact that the 9RT has a more likable camera here, especially thanks to that OIS sensor here. But apart from that, like, leave that thing aside. Obviously, design is subjective. Leave that thing aside. The 11T Pro offers far more value for money and is definitely a better pick in comparison to the 9RT. The 9RT, I think, probably would have sold better if it was even at the same pricing. I think at that moment, in that kind of a scenario, I might have been able to wholeheartedly recommend the 9RT. But right now, with a price difference like this, the 11T Pro definitely makes more sense as a consumer. The only problem with all of this is the fact that OnePlus is still recognizable as a flagship brand. The problem with Xiaomi is that most folks still think of Xiaomi as a budget device. So, I mean, even if the looks of the device are flauntable, a lot of folks still feel that Xiaomi is not a phone that you would like to flaunt if you're spending 45 grand. That is a kind of mindset that needs to change, because definitely this is a very good phone and easily competes and even manages to beat the OnePlus 9RT. So yeah. Well, that was it. If you found this video helpful, make sure to let us know by giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more awesome tech content. Till then, this is One from GTR, and I'll see you in the next one.